Hello, and welcome back to Speak English Daily.
Hi, everyone. We are very happy to see you here today.
Today, we're going to work on something very practical: how to prepare and deliver a strong speech in English. Many learners can have everyday conversations, but when they need to stand in front of people and speak clearly about an idea, it suddenly feels much harder. A speech requires structure, clear sentences, and confidence. The good news is that all of these things can be learned with practice.
I can relate to that. When I talk with friends, I feel relaxed, but when I imagine speaking in front of a group, I start worrying about my words and grammar.
That's completely normal. A speech simply means sharing your thoughts with an audience in an organized way. People give speeches in many situations: at school presentations, work meetings, conferences, or even social events. The key goal is to communicate one clear idea so that listeners understand and remember it.
So the speaker should focus on one main idea instead of trying to say too many things.
Exactly. In speaking, clarity is more important than complexity. Let's introduce an important word: message. Your message is the main idea you want your listeners to remember after your speech.
My message today is that learning English can create new opportunities.
That's a strong sentence. Now let's learn another useful word: audience. The audience refers to the people who are listening to you.
So if I give a presentation in my classmates are the audience.
Correct. Here's a helpful sentence: when preparing a speech, it is important to think about your audience.
When preparing a speech, it is important to understand what your audience wants to learn.
Very good. Understanding your audience helps you choose the right examples and vocabulary. For instance, if you are speaking to students, you might use examples about studying, exams, or career goals.
That makes sense. If the examples relate to the audience, they will pay more attention.
Exactly. Now let's practice another useful phrase for communication support. Sometimes when you're listening and something is not clear, you can say, "Could you explain that again?"
Could you explain that again? I want to make sure I understand the idea.
Excellent. Another helpful phrase is, "Could you give an example?"
Could you give an example of how to start a simple speech?
A very simple start could be, "Today I would like to share an idea about why learning English is important in today's world."
That sentence sounds clear and easy to understand.
Now let's focus on some important vocabulary that helps people create a strong speech. When you understand these words, it becomes easier to organize your ideas and express them clearly. The first word we will practice is persuasive. When something is persuasive, it convinces people to agree with your idea or point of view.
So a persuasive speech tries to influence what people think or believe.
Exactly. Let's look at a sentence example. A persuasive speech encourages the audience to think differently about a topic.
A persuasive speech encourages the audience to consider a new idea or perspective.
That's a good sentence. Notice how you explained the effect of persuasion. Speakers often use persuasive language when they want people to support a plan, believe in an idea, or take action.
I see. So persuasion is not just about talking, it's about influencing the listener.
Correct. Now let's practice another important word: confident tone. A tone is the way your voice sounds when you speak. A confident tone shows that you believe in your message.
So even if the words are good, the speaker also needs to sound confident.
Exactly. Here's a sentence example. A confident tone helps the audience trust the speaker.
A confident tone makes the speaker sound more convincing and professional.
Excellent. Confidence often grows with preparation and practice. When you know your topic well, your voice naturally becomes more confident.
That makes sense. If I understand my topic clearly, I won't hesitate while speaking.
Now, let's learn another useful phrase: clear message. A clear message means your idea is easy for people to understand.
So the audience should quickly understand what the speaker is trying to say.
Exactly. Here is a sentence example. Every strong speech has a clear message.
Every strong speech has a clear message that the audience can remember.
That's a strong sentence. When preparing a speech, it helps to ask yourself a simple question. What do I want people to remember after I finish speaking?
That question helps the speaker stay focused on the main idea.
Yes, it does. Now let's practice another helpful communication phrase. If you don't understand something during a conversation, you can say, "Could you clarify that?"
Could you clarify that? I want to make sure I understand the meaning correctly.
Very good. Asking questions like this helps you continue the conversation without feeling confused.
That's helpful for learners because sometimes we hesitate to ask for clarification.
Exactly. Asking for clarification shows that you are actively listening. Before we continue, I'd like to ask everyone listening a question. Have you ever had to give a speech in English or in your own language? What was the most difficult part for you when speaking in front of people? Share your answer in the comments section.
That's a great question because many learners probably have interesting experiences with public speaking.
Now, let's talk about how a speech is organized. When people give a strong speech, they usually follow a simple structure. This structure has three main parts: the opening, the main points, and the conclusion. When you organize your speech in this way, it becomes easier for the audience to follow your ideas.
So a speech is similar to a story. It has a beginning, a middle, and an ending.
That's a good way to think about it. Let's begin with the opening. The opening is the first part of your speech, and it helps capture the audience's attention. It also introduces your topic. A clear opening tells people what you are going to talk about.
So the opening prepares the audience for the main idea.
Exactly. Here is a simple example. Today, I would like to talk about why strong communication skills are important in our daily lives.
Today, I would like to talk about how learning English can help people communicate with others around the world.
That's a clear opening sentence. Notice how you immediately tell the audience the topic. Another helpful phrase in an opening is, "Let me begin by sharing an idea."
Let me begin by sharing an idea about why practicing English every day can improve your speaking skills.
Very nice. Now let's move to the second part of a speech, which is the main points. This is where you explain your ideas in more detail. Usually, a speaker shares 2 or 3 important ideas that support the message.
So the main points explain the message and provide examples.
Exactly. For instance, if your speech is about learning English, one main point might be that English helps people communicate internationally. Another main point might be that English can improve career opportunities.
I can try making a sentence for a main point. One important reason to learn English is that it helps people communicate with others from different countries.
Excellent. That sentence clearly explains the idea. You can also support your main point with an example. For instance, many international companies use English as their working language.
Many international companies use English as their working language, so employees who speak English can collaborate with people from different countries.
That's a strong supporting sentence. Now let's move to the final part of a speech, which is the conclusion. The conclusion is where the speaker summarizes the ideas and leaves a final thought for the audience.
So the conclusion reminds the audience about the main message.
Exactly. A simple conclusion might begin with a phrase like, "In conclusion, learning English is an important skill that can open many opportunities."
In conclusion, learning English can help people connect with the world and achieve their personal and professional goals.
That's a very effective closing idea. When you structure your speech with a clear opening, strong main points, and a memorable conclusion, your audience can easily follow your message from beginning to end.
I can see how this structure makes speaking more organized and easier for listeners to understand.
Now, let's focus on one of the most important parts of a speech, the opening. The first few sentences of your speech are very important because they capture the audience's attention. If the beginning is interesting, people will listen more carefully to the rest of what you say.
That makes sense. If the beginning is boring, the audience might stop paying attention.
Exactly. There are several effective ways to begin a speech. 3 common methods are asking a question, telling a short story, or sharing a surprising fact. These techniques help create curiosity and encourage listeners to focus on your message.
I like the idea of starting with a question because it immediately makes the audience think.
That's true. A question invites the audience to reflect on the topic. For example, if you are giving a speech about learning English, you could start with a question like this. Have you ever wondered how learning one language can open doors around the world?
That opening makes the audience think about the benefits of learning a language.
Exactly. Now try creating your own opening question related to communication or learning English.
Here is my attempt. Have you ever felt nervous when speaking English in front of other people?
That's a very relatable question. Many listeners will connect with that feeling. When the audience recognizes a common experience, they become more interested in what the speaker will say next.
I can see how that would make people pay attention.
Now let's explore another method, telling a short story. Stories are powerful because they help people imagine a real situation. A short personal story can make your speech feel more natural and engaging.
So the speaker shares a small experience that relates to the topic.
Exactly. For example, a speaker might say, "A few years ago, I struggled to speak English during a job interview. I knew the answers, but I didn't have the confidence to express them clearly."
That story sounds very real, and many learners might feel the same way.
That's the idea. Stories help the audience connect emotionally with the speaker. Now, try creating a short story opening.
Let me try. When I first started learning English, I was afraid to speak because I worried about making mistakes.
That's a very natural opening. It shows honesty and helps the audience relate to your experience. I think stories also make the speech feel more personal.
Absolutely. Now let's talk about the third method, sharing a surprising fact. A surprising fact can immediately capture attention because people become curious about the information.
So the speaker gives an interesting piece of information that makes people want to learn more.
Exactly. For example, a speaker might say, more than 1 billion people around the world are currently learning English.
That fact definitely makes the topic feel important. Now try creating an opening line that includes a surprising fact about communication or language learning.
Here is my example. Millions of people around the world learn English every day because it helps them connect with global opportunities.
That's a strong opening idea. It highlights the importance of the topic right away. I can see that using a question, a short story, or an interesting fact can make the beginning of a speech much more engaging. Now that we know how to start a speech with a strong opening, the next step is developing the main points clearly. This is the middle part of the speech, where you explain your ideas in more detail. A strong speaker does not simply state an idea. Instead, the speaker supports the idea with explanations and examples, so the audience can fully understand it.
So the speaker first introduces the idea and then explains it further.
Exactly. Let's practice that approach. Imagine your speech is about the importance of learning English. One main idea could be that English helps people communicate internationally. But if you only say that sentence, the idea may feel too short. You need to expand it.
So I should explain why English helps communication.
Right. Here's a simple example. First, you state the idea. One important benefit of learning English is the ability to communicate with people from different countries. Then you explain it. English is widely used in business, education, and international travel.
I see. The explanation helps the audience understand the reason behind the idea.
Exactly. Now try building a sentence that introduces a main idea about English learning.
One major advantage of learning English is that it helps people access more information and knowledge.
That's a strong idea. Now expand that idea by explaining it.
Many educational resources, research papers, and online courses are available in English, which allows learners to study a wide range of subjects.
Excellent. You clearly explained the idea. Notice how the explanation makes the message stronger. Now let's add another technique, giving an example. Examples make your ideas more concrete and easier to understand.
So, after explaining the idea, the speaker can provide a real situation.
Exactly. For instance, you might say, for example, many international universities offer courses in English which allows students from different countries to study together.
Let me try building a sentence with an example. For example, many professionals improve their careers after learning English because they can work with global companies.
That's a clear and effective example. When you use explanations and examples together, your speech becomes much more convincing.
I understand. The audience can see the idea and also imagine how it works in real life.
That's exactly the goal. Let's practice another helpful phrase for developing ideas. You can say, another important point is, this phrase helps you introduce the next idea smoothly.
Another important point is that learning English helps people travel more confidently.
Good. Now expand that idea with an explanation.
When people understand English, they can ask for directions, read signs, and communicate with others while visiting new places.
Very good. Your explanation shows how the idea works in practical situations. Now let's practice a helpful phrase for learners when they need assistance in conversation. If you want someone to explain something more clearly, you can say, could you explain that in another way?
Could you explain that in another way? I want to understand the idea more clearly.
Excellent. Using phrases like this helps maintain communication and encourages learning.
I can see how speakers clearly explain their ideas and provide examples. The audience can easily follow the message.
Now let's focus on persuasive language. Persuasive language is used when a speaker wants to influence the audience's thinking or encourage them to take action. In many speeches, the goal is not only to share information, but also to motivate people to consider a new idea or change their perspective.
So, persuasive language helps the speaker make the message stronger and more convincing.
Exactly. One useful phrase in persuasive speaking is, it is important to remember that. This phrase helps highlight a key idea that the audience should think about carefully. For example, it is important to remember that learning a language takes patience and consistent effort.
It is important to remember that small daily practice can lead to significant improvement in English speaking.
That's a very effective sentence. You clearly encourage the listener to think about the value of daily practice. Another helpful phrase is, one reason this matters is, this phrase allows you to explain why your idea is important.
So it helps the speaker explain the importance of the point.
Exactly. Here's an example. One reason this matters is that strong communication skills help people express their ideas clearly in both personal and professional situations.
One reason this matters is that learning English allows people to connect with opportunities around the world.
Excellent. You used the phrase naturally. Now let's learn another persuasive phrase. Consider the impact of. This phrase invites the audience to imagine a situation or think deeply about a possible result.
So it encourages listeners to reflect on the idea.
That's right. For example, consider the impact of being able to communicate confidently with people from different cultures.
Consider the impact of improving your English and being able to study or work in another country.
Excellent. That sentence encourages the audience to imagine a positive future. Persuasive language often works well when it helps people visualize possibilities.
I notice that persuasive sentences often sound encouraging and inspiring.
Exactly. Now let's practice another phrase that speakers often use. This is why. This phrase connects an idea with its conclusion.
So it explains the final message.
Correct. Here's an example. This is why practicing English every day can make a meaningful difference in your communication skills.
This is why learners should not be afraid of making mistakes while practicing English.
Excellent. Mistakes are part of the learning process, and recognizing that idea can help people become more confident.
I agree. When learners understand that mistakes are normal, they become more willing to speak.
That's an important point. Now let's practice a helpful phrase for language learners during conversation. If you want to confirm that you understood something correctly, you can say, "Let me see if I understood correctly."
Let me see if I understood correctly. A good conclusion summarizes the ideas and leaves the audience with a clear message.
Perfect. That sentence shows you're checking your understanding, which is a very useful communication skill.
I can see that a well-structured conclusion makes the entire speech feel complete and meaningful.
Exactly. Now let's focus on the final part of a speech, which is the conclusion. A strong conclusion helps the audience remember your message. When a speaker reaches the end of a speech, it's important to briefly summarize the main ideas and leave listeners with a clear final thought.
So the conclusion reminds people about the key points of the speech.
Exactly. Think of the conclusion as the moment when you bring everything together. You remind the audience what you talked about and why it matters. A helpful phrase to begin a conclusion is "in conclusion." This phrase clearly signals that the speech is coming to an end.
So the audience immediately understands that the speaker is finishing the message.
That's right. Here's an example sentence. In conclusion, strong communication skills can help people share ideas, build connections, and create new opportunities.
In conclusion, learning English is an important step for anyone who wants to communicate confidently in an international environment.
That's a strong closing sentence. Notice how you repeated the main idea of the speech. Repetition helps the audience remember your message.
I see. It reminds the listeners of the main purpose of the speech.
Exactly. Another helpful phrase for concluding a speech is to summarize. This phrase allows the speaker to briefly restate the most important points.
So it is like giving a short review of the ideas?
Correct. Here's an example. To summarize, practicing English regularly improves confidence, communication skills, and opportunities for personal growth.
To summarize, learning English helps people connect with others, gain knowledge, and explore new career possibilities.
Very good! Your sentence clearly highlights the benefits of learning English. Now let's practice another technique that makes conclusions memorable. A speaker can end with an encouraging message that inspires the audience.
So the final sentence should leave a positive impression.
Exactly. For example, a speaker might say, "Remember that every small step you take toward learning English brings you closer to new opportunities."
Remember that every time you practice speaking English, you are building confidence and improving your ability to communicate.
Excellent. That sentence encourages listeners to keep practicing. A strong conclusion often motivates people to think or act differently after the speech.
I like that idea. The final sentence should stay in the audience's mind even after the speech ends.
Exactly. Now let's practice a helpful phrase that learners can use during a conversation or a presentation. If something is unclear, you can say, "Could you explain that part again?"
Could you explain that part again? I want to make sure I understand the point correctly.
Excellent. That phrase helps maintain communication and shows that you are actively listening.
Practicing this speech helped me understand how useful structure and clear expressions can be when speaking in English.